Kindly like, share, and subscribe. The Leather Wallet is a scary story about two sisters who find a man's wallet on the bus. Inside they find an odd note written in Latin. This is based on a story from the Philippines. My sister Maria was 1 year older than me. We went to the same boarding school. Every weekend we were allowed to go home and visit our mother. One Sunday evening my sister and I went shopping in the city. When we were going home we caught the bus. Maria found a leather wallet lying on the floor beneath our seat. The wallet was pretty old and it looked like it was worn out. There was $20 inside. I told her we should split the money, but my sister refused. She was always such an honest person. She said we should return the wallet to its rightful owner. When we got home, the house was empty. There was a note on the kitchen table from our mother telling us to behave ourselves while she was away. She had gone on a 2-week holiday with her new boyfriend. Maria opened the leather wallet and started going through the contents. There was a bank card with no name on it, a bus ticket, an old black and white photo of a man, and a folded piece of paper. She took out the paper and looked at it. "What does it say?" I asked. "I don't know," replied Maria. "I think it's in Latin." I grabbed the note and began reading. Mortem te salvtams est dexter mic frite. Ave versus Christus, verum de trevi vermi est reflexum, arum diri tripum. Dextrumi lentinum, ave satani. "No, silly," my sister laughed. "You're pronouncing it all wrong. Don't you know anything? When the Romans were writing down Latin they used AV instead of AU. Those verses are pronounced like you." "Okay, if you're so smart then you read it," I replied. Maria snatched the piece of paper from my hands and read it aloud. "What does it mean?" I asked. "I have no idea," she replied. "We studied Latin in school but I don't recognize any of the words." She tucked the paper back into the leather wallet and left it on her bedside table, telling me she would hand it in to the police station next week. During the night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard Maria suddenly jump out of bed and run into the bathroom. She was retching and vomiting into the toilet. Shocked, I climbed out of bed and went to see if she was all right. I found her bent over the toilet bowl, supporting herself with one hand. She was crying. "What happened?" I asked. "Maria, what's wrong with you?" She didn't answer and just waved me away. The next morning Maria had a fever. She said she felt dizzy and couldn't go to school. She wanted me to go alone and tell the teachers she was sick and would come to school tomorrow. I spent the rest of the week at boarding school, but Maria never showed up. I kept sending her text messages asking where she was, but she never replied. The next weekend when I went home I found the house in darkness. There was a horrible stench in the air. It smelled like rotting flesh. "Maria, Maria," I called. "Where are you? It stinks in here." When I went upstairs, my sister suddenly appeared from the bathroom. "Maria, what's that stink?" I asked, wrinkling up my nose. "It smells like a decomposing rat." She nodded her head. "It's coming from the neighbor's house," she said. "Their dog died. It got hit by a car. After it got run over, it still managed to get inside its doghouse and died there." "Why didn't they bury it?" I asked. "The neighbor is on holiday. It's been days and he hasn't returned yet. The gate is locked and nobody can get in." "Really, the gate is locked? But how did the dog get back inside?" "Beats me." "Well, let's keep the windows shut so the stench won't get inside," I said. "It's enough to make you vomit." Maria went around the house closing all the windows. A little while later I made dinner and called my sister. She said she didn't want anything to eat because she had lost her appetite. I ate alone. That night as I lay in bed, I could still smell the neighbor's dead dog. The stench was overpowering. I got up and sprayed the room with a can of air freshener. The next day the smell was still there. I went out for a walk just to get away from the terrible stench. Maria stayed in her room all day. She said she had to catch up on her schoolwork. On Sunday evening I was packing my clothes and preparing to go back to boarding school. I didn't see Maria packing anything. "Aren't you coming with me?" I asked. "No. I still haven't fully recovered," she replied. "My school uniform is still dirty as well. I'll do the laundry later." I went back to school, but all week I heard nothing from my sister. I texted her until I ran out of credit, but she never answered. One morning I woke up to find a text message on my phone. It was from my mother. When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. "Come home immediately. Your sister is dead. Mom." The phone fell from my trembling hands and I felt so dizzy I had to sit down. It seemed like I was in a terrible nightmare. I kept expecting to wake up and find out that she was still alive. Sadly, that was not to be. I packed a change of clothes and went home straight away. When I got to the house, I saw that our gate was open and there were several people gathered around. My mom was standing in the driveway, crying and holding a piece of paper in her hands. "Mom, what happened?" I asked, bursting into tears. My mother embraced me and held me tight. "Maria died. She's been dead for 13 days. I found her under the bed. Her body was rotting. The smell was unbearable. Where were you? Why didn't you find her?" I was shaking. A chill went down my spine. Who was it that was with me the last time I went home? Who was it that slept in the bed beside me? I looked over and saw our neighbor standing in his yard. His dog was sitting at his feet. The same dog Maria had said was dead and causing such a stink. Nobody knows what happened to my sister. It's still a huge mystery. I suspected it had something to do with the note she had read in Latin. I tried to find a translation online. According to my research, this is what the words mean. Mortem means death, Saltums means to salute or give honor, Trevi means life, Avenue versus Christs means hail, the Antichrist, Reflexum means reflection, Dextrv Lentenv means there will be a wake after 13 days, Avenue Satani means hail Satan. In other words, it's a satanic incantation, a black magic spell. According to what I've read, it is used by people who want to die. They recite this spell to make a pact with Satan, to offer their souls up to the devil. After reading the incantation, they slowly waste away and die. Within 13 days you will see the person who spoke the words, but in truth, they will only be a reflection of their former selves. A ghost. Then after 13 days their dead body will resurface. There is one thing that still baffles me. I read the note too. Why didn't it affect me? Why didn't I suffer the same fate as my beloved sister? Could it have been the way I read it? Perhaps my ignorance of the Latin language saved my life. But wait a minute. When you were reading this, did you read the Latin words? Did you read it wrong like I did? I hope so. I hope you didn't read it correctly. Did you? The Broken Window is a scary story about a mother who takes her daughter for a drive. When the car breaks down on a lonely mountain road, they have a horrifying encounter. It is based on a Japanese story. A week ago, I was driving home and my young daughter was in the car with me. I was in a hurry, so I decided to take a shortcut that led us down a lonely mountain road. All of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, the engine started to splutter and the car ground to a halt. When I took out my mobile phone, I realized that I had no signal. We were completely stranded deep in the mountains. I had no idea how to fix the car and it was growing dark. There was no gas station for miles and the road was not used very often. It was clear that we would have to spend the night in the car and hope that some passing motorist would stop and give us a ride. The sun was going down and it was beginning to get very cold. An eerie silence descended over the mountain and all I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. My daughter went to sleep in the passenger seat. I closed my eyes and was starting to drift off as well, when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying. It sounded like gibberish. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as it got closer and closer, I opened my eyes and looked around. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. A dark figure was approaching the car. All I could see was a silhouette. It looked like a man and he seemed to be dragging his foot. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. I looked down at my daughter. She was still asleep. I didn't want to wake her up. All of a sudden the noise stopped. The eerie silence returned. Then I looked up and got the fright of my life. I had to stop myself from screaming out loud. Standing at the passenger window was the most hideous figure I have ever seen. It looked like a man, but his face was so twisted and contorted that it formed a frightening visage. He was horribly deformed. It was as if every piece of skin on his face had been peeled off and all that was left was bloody red muscle and sinew. He had no nose. He had no ears. His piercing eyes stared at me through the glass. I turned the key in the ignition again and again and tried to start the car, but it was no use. The engine just chugged and died. Outside the window, the hideous man took out a knife. He began chanting over and over to himself. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. Each time he said it, he stabbed the window with the knife, hitting it harder and harder each time. I kept trying to start the car. Tears were streaming down my face. I was desperate to get out of there. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. Suddenly there was a loud crash and the passenger window shattered. Broken glass showered all over my daughter. I screamed hysterically. The man's arm came through the window and he brandished the knife, lashing out at me. Tensametsu, Tensametsu, Tensametsu. Just then I turned the key one last time and the engine sprang to life. I floored the accelerator and the car tore out of there like a bat out of hell. I sped off down the narrow mountain road, leaving the hideous man far behind. I didn't know where we were going, I just kept driving and driving, never daring to look back. That's when I noticed my daughter hadn't moved. When I looked down at her, I could see she was muttering something to herself. Tensametsu, Tensametsu. Tensametsu. A chill ran down my spine. Her face was pale and she was trembling. I shook her, trying to wake her up, but when she opened my eyes, what I saw horrified me. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. All I could see were the whites of her eyes. Her teeth were gritted together and she was foaming at the mouth. Her face had changed. She didn't even look like my daughter anymore. She just kept growling over and over. Tensametsu. 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 I kept driving and finally I saw the city lights up ahead. We came to a church and I pulled over to the side of the road. Scooping my daughter up in both arms, I carried her into the church and started screaming for help. An old priest appeared from a doorway and asked what was wrong. I told him about the thing I had encountered on the mountain road. He took one look at my daughter, then snatched her from my arms and laid her out on the church altar. As I watched, crying and shaking with fear, he took out some rosary beads and held the little wooden cross to my daughter's forehead. Then he started reciting prayers in Latin. The priest let us stay there for the night. He put my daughter in a spare bed and stayed up with her all night long, holding her hand, anointing her with holy water and reciting prayers over her. He placed a Bible on her chest and a scapula around her neck. He told me my daughter was possessed by a demon and he had to try to perform an exorcism. He said that if it was not done and my daughter stayed like this for 49 days, she would never recover. She would be left permanently insane. The priest instructed me to leave my daughter with him so that he could perform the necessary rituals. He said that if I stayed, there was a good chance the demon could possess me as well. It has been a week since my daughter was possessed and the priest is still taking care of her. I check on her every day. It's like she isn't even my daughter anymore. She smirks and looks at me with indescribably horrible eyes. I just want my daughter back. If you ever find yourself on a lonely mountain road, whatever you do, don't stop.